This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 28 of season 2 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, July 10th, 1909. I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford 114 years ago. Issue begins with the Forge Village section. The services at St. Andrew's Mission at 7 o'clock last Sunday evening were well attended. Until further notice, the afternoon service will be omitted. Joseph Leclerc, a well-known young man of this village, son of Mr. and Mrs. Felix Leclerc, and Miss Eugenie Paré, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Adolphe Paré, of Stanford, Quebec, were married at that place Monday morning, June 28th. Upon their return here, a large reception was held at his father's. They received many handsome and valuable presents. Judge Frederick A. Fisher and wife, with Mr. and Mrs. McMasters of Southbridge, Mrs. Fisher's parents, and also Mrs. Fisher and daughter of Westford, were the guests of Miss Lila Fisher at the Birches last week. The Fisher's cottage was on Forge Pond, I believe in the Littleton part of the pond. Miss Anna Orne Foster, Orne is O-R-N-E, of Providence, Rhode Island, is spending a few weeks at Miss Fisher's cottage as her guest, hoping that the quiet of the woods and the nearness of the water may help regain her health. Mr. and Mrs. G.W. Good with an E at the end, opened their cottage, the Oatka, spelled O-A-T-K-A, Monday. Mr. and Mrs. Vincent Small and little Miss Norma are at their cottage for the summer. Also, Mr. and Mrs. Stewart and Miss Dorothy, and indeed nearly every cottage is occupied for the vacation, making a very lively place on the shores of our pond. Of course, they're talking about Forge Pond. Sunday morning, as some young men of our village were enjoying a sail with a sailboat, the wind suddenly veered about and upset the boat, giving them a drenching. A boat put out from the Tizer cottage and one from the opposite shore, taking the boys ashore and towing the sailboat to the shore. The Forge Village celebration of July 4th, so long anticipated, was enjoyed by everyone. Everything from the parade to the games was enthusiastically enjoyed. Good nature followed defeat, so that no unpleasant feelings were shown. They're talking about the baseball game that apparently the Forge Village team lost. Constables Boynton and Norton were present, but really as spectators. The committee are to be thanked for the efficient manner of the whole affair. The next section is called Instantly Killed, and it's another sad story. It is with sadness that we write of the tragic death of Myron A. Carkin, who was accidentally killed at the railroad station at Ayer Tuesday afternoon as he was returning from his work. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. A.W. Carkin of this village, and his age was 20 years, 7 months, and 4 days. The young man was very much liked by everyone, and while he was quiet and unassuming, he was ever ready to lend a helping hand to all. His death was a terrible blow to the stricken family, and they have the sympathy of everyone. This paragraph is followed by the first stanza of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem Resignation, published in 1849. There is no flock, however watched and tended, but one dead lamb is there. There is no fireside, howe'er defended, but has one vacant chair. Funeral services were held at the Methodist Episcopal Church, Graniteville, Thursday afternoon, Reverend Mr. Armand officiating. Prayers were held at the Father's in this village, thence the sorrowing one proceeded to the church. After the benediction, the remains were taken to their final resting place at Fairview Cemetery. The grave was fairly surrounded by the beautiful floral offerings from so many of the friends. Those with whom he was associated on the Boston and Maine Railroad and the Lowell and Fitchburg Street Railway attended the church in a body. Next is the Westford Center section. Mrs. Leonard W. Wheeler's attack of pneumonia, reported last week, proved of short duration, and she is now much improved. Miss Ida Manuel of Franklin, New Hampshire, a former teacher in the academy, has been renewing old acquaintance in town. The next section is called The Fourth. Westford's celebration of July 4th was the best ever. That's in quotes, the best ever. The quote, night before, end quote, was quieter than sometimes, perhaps partly because the boys began it Saturday evening by demolishing an old shed belonging to Henry O. Keyes. While the destruction of a building is clearly an unlawful act, the shed, by the manner it was placed overhanging the premises of the Union Congregational Church on Lincoln Street, has been a trespass on their property and an eyesore to the town for 2 years, so that few of the neighbors sympathize with Mr. Keyes. Monday morning, an effigy was swinging in the breeze in front of these premises labeled Keyes Hotel. This shed would have been located about where the Westford Museum parking lot is now, and there was, I think there was maybe a blacksmith shop and a wheelwright shop that were located near there also. Passing over unauthorized features of the celebration, we turn to the parade, which started promptly from the Common at 8:30 a.m. Joel Wall, costumed as a big Injun, slang for Indian, was marshal, with Harold Hildreth as mounted aide. Wayland Balch and his daughter May as Uncle Sam and Columbia were followed by an Indian squaw and several girls costumed with flags and 2 Indian women in modern dress. The Nashua Military Band marched next, followed by the Graniteville Hose Company in their red shirts. Then came Hose Number 1, which was the Westford Center Hose Company, followed by a float from Minot's Corner, on which was a spray pump labeled, "This is what we get." Apparently the people at Minot's Corner weren't happy with the fact that they didn't have any fire hydrants in their area. I take that to mean. Quote, Hose Number 23, end quote, consisted of Julian Cameron's Shetland pony in a light wagon with several young boys helmeted with tin dippers. Their rear guard was 2 young girls on horseback. The Grange Degree team, dressed in white, filled a large float, followed by a float from Parkerville labeled Gilmore Band. A one-hoss chaise, represented 1776, was contrasted with a rubber tire buggy for 1909. Sam Taylor as coachman for a, quote, belated June bridal couple, end quote, teamed my son John with Reuben, dressed as a bride. That is, John and Reuben were both his sons. I guess John played the groom and Reuben played the bride. Superintendent of Roads, Frank Miller, drove a span of horses attached to a dump cart, in which was his force of workmen. The Enterprise Club float was followed by the Thimble Club float. Mrs. Frank Miller, having accidentally lamed herself in practicing for the ladies' baseball game, very appropriately rode next as a, quote, wounded suffragette, unquote. Bingville's representation were followed by a carriage holding 4 of our most petite matrons as, quote, Mellon's food babies, MELLIN''S. I'm not sure what that references to. 4 handsomely decorated automobiles here varied the procession with a, quote, one-hoss chaise, end quote, containing the chairman of the assessors, who was J. Willard Fletcher at this time, and his children in between, to contrast old and new methods of locomotion. A.H. Burnham's corn harvester was the only 3-horse hitch. The local branch of the WCTU were on the water wagon, literally, as their float was decorated with an old-fashioned well sweep and curb. After wandering about the streets of the village, the procession went to the ball grounds near the depot, where the Westford Club fought with the Shirley Club while the band played, defeating them 7-0. In the afternoon, this club went to Milford, New Hampshire, where they defeated the Nashua team by a score of 4-2, thus scoring 2 victories in one day. While the band concert was in progress in the afternoon, there was a ladies' ball game between the suffragettes, the matrons, and the Liberty Bells, the spinsters, won by the Liberty Bells. by a score of 9-4. This game was followed by other sports, including a 100-yard dash, a running broad jump, a standing broad jump, the hop, skip, and jump, what we now call the triple jump, and the last one was a boys' run around the common. The next section is the About Town section. Charles S. Edwards, living on the corner of Plain and Brookside Roads, known as Edwards Corner and named for Charles' family, has been appointed station agent at Brookside in place of several declined and resigned. Daniel H. Sheehan is improving the appearance of several rods of the Stony Brook Road by the use of a paintbrush on that faded house. Go thou and do likewise with a whitewash brush on that building called barn. The phrase go and do thou likewise is actually Jesus' punchline to the story of the Good Samaritan, found in Luke chapter 10, verses 30-37. Mrs. Catherine Howard of Lowell is spending the summer at the old homestead with her brother, Daniel H. Sheehan, on the Stony Brook Road. A large crowd gathered on the Fletcher Field near Westford Depot on Monday, the 4th of July, to witness the ball game between Westford and Shirley, the two well-known old-time contestants and generally even matched in winning, but for some cause the Shirley team got badly used up and mixed up in the early start-off and were landed in hopeless defeat by a score of 8-0. It was, you may remember, it was reported as 7-0 by a previous correspondent. This is the forenoon. In the afternoon, the Westford team went to Milford, New Hampshire, and beat the crack team of the state and gave them a nice, choice, skillful defeat and the score of 4-3. So there now, who says Westford don't know how to celebrate the 4th and show the other fellow also how to do it? George C. Moore of the Brookside Mills used the force pump hose Sunday afternoon on all of his mill property and boarding houses as an antidote for explosive and inflammable 4th of July firecrackers and other gunpowder snappers. Harvey Poley of Quebec spent the 4th with his brother, Alvin G. Poley, on the Lowell Road. Alvin was a neighbor of Samuel Taylor. Colonel Edwin D. Metcalf of Auburn, New York, was in town Tuesday in consultation with friends regarding the proposed Soldiers' Monument. According to present plans, the monument will be dedicated next Memorial Day. The design has not been fully determined on, but will probably be of the, quote, Minuteman, end quote, style of design. It is proposed to call an early meeting of interested citizens to discuss the matter of a suitable site and other particulars. Room permitting, the apex of the common would be the real showy situation. By the apex of the common, he means the eastern end where the cannon is located. Miss Ida Manuel of Franklin, New Hampshire, a former teacher in the academy who didn't go to Europe, did come to Westford's 4th. Never mind, the hills of Westford are just as beautiful and much safer than the lakes of Killarney. The next section is the next paragraph is about the Westford Grange. At the Grange meeting last week, Thursday evening, the lecturer's hour was entertainingly and instructively occupied. Music by the Grange Orchestra so lively and good that it had to be played all over again several times, such was the hand clapping for it, that it couldn't be put off with a bow. Mr. and Mrs. H.B. Reed read a paper of much interest and news to many on, quote, what the women of the North did for the women of the South during the Civil War, end quote. Charles L. Hildreth read and explained, quote, farm law, end quote, in its bearing on the farmer, with particular reference to the milk standard, forest laws, the setting of fires, and the protection of wild game. Mrs. F.C. Wright read and quoted interesting facts relating to the early history of the town. The discussion of the question, from which do we derive the most benefits, education or observation, was postponed until the first meeting in August on account of the crowded benefits of the evening. Next paragraph is called Celebration. The old town took quite a lively turn with its parade, sports, and band on Monday. City people who saw the parade volunteered the opinion that it was equal to many city parades. It simply demonstrates that there is an abundance of reserve utility in a variety of ways that only awaits some 4th of July to set it off. Aside from those who received prizes and honorable mention, there was a whole platoon of wholesome, laughable showing, ranging all the way from the simplicity of the old-fashioned, rugged American type of life as exemplified in the one-horse open shay of 1776, in contrast with the pomp and style of the modern life of 1909, and everything else added as much to the hurrah of the parade as anything in the line of special mention. Thimble Club, Parkerville Fire Department, Blanchard Clowns, Westford Road Department, Burnham's Reaping Machine, the Fletcher Twins, and all that memory has failed to keep a tight rein on. The writer modestly and thankfully acknowledges his dollar's worth of daughter-in-law from belated bridal couple as his contribution towards the 4th. He's, of course, referring to the float that he did with his 2 sons as a bridal party. The next paragraph is called 80th Birthday. Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey, who was the pastor of the First Parish Church, Unitarian in Westford Center, celebrated 4th of July and his 80th birthday Monday, a rare and fast-passing type of the physical, moral, and intellectual personality of early New England life, wisely shunning burdensome pomp on the one hand or demoralizing simplicity on the other. At church Sunday, he was youthful with the advice from the experiences of his fourscore observatory. Quote, "Your life is not all mistakes. Why spend all the time looking at them? Cultivate looking on the other side," end quote. The next section is from Graniteville, and the first paragraph is entitled The Fourth. The 4th was passed very quietly in this village. The younger element were out for a time the night before, but very little noise was made, and aside from most of the hitching posts on Broadway being provided with collars of drain pipe that was found handily on one of the side streets, very little damage was done. The most of the crowd took in the bonfire that was touched off in Ford's Village shortly after 12. On Monday morning, many people from here took in the celebration in Westford Center. The local fire department, resplendent in red shirts, duck trousers, and blue caps, made a decided hit in the parade with Captain John A. Healy and Lieutenants Harrington and Prynne mounted in front, followed by the decorated fire wagon with driver Austin Healy and Albert R. Schote of the Board of Engineers on the front seat, followed by the regular firemen who marched in columns of 4s and made a fine appearance. The fire laddies met the National Military Band at West Graniteville, and after marching through the main streets here, barges were taken for Westford, where they fell into the regular positions. The whole affair was very nice. Joel Wall came in for a share of prize money with his excellent makeup as an Indian chief. His companion, Miss Mary Rafferty as the Indian maiden, also was commended on her fine appearance. Next is the baseball paragraph. The Graniteville Blues visited Brookside on last Saturday and took the local club of that place into camp by the score of 10-9. The game was hotly contested from start to finish, and it was somebody's game until the last man was out in the final inning. By winning this game, Graniteville maintains their position as leaders in the Stony Brook League. The next section is entitled Death. It's more about Myron Carkin's untimely death. The news of the sudden and untimely death of Myron A. Carkin of Ford's Village, who was killed by being run over by a freight train in Ayer on Tuesday afternoon, came as a severe shock to the people in this village, where Myron was so well known. Myron was a Graniteville boy, having been born and raised here. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Augustine Carkin. He was a fine specimen of young manhood and an athlete of no mean ability, having been a former member of the Graniteville Baseball Club and prominent in athletic events in this vicinity. Before taking up his work on the Boston and Maine Road, he was conductor on the Lowell and Fitchburg Street Railway, where he formed many friendships by his pleasing personality and his close attention to duty. The sympathy of the entire community is extended to the bereaved family in their sad affliction, for his sudden death is taken as a personal loss to his many friends in this village. There's also another article about his death called Killed Instantly that appeared in the Ayer part of the newspaper, but I won't read that here. That's the news in Westford for the week ending July 10th, 1909. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find the transcriptions and podcasts for the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.